Chris, do you have a second to have a coffee or something stronger?
Um, does water count? Because I might be a little over caffeinated today, but for
I
some
know it's only
hydration.
11 a.m., but if I didn't have an autoimmune condition, I think I'd be on the vodka.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell me, let's start there. You've recently mentioned an experience that you had with a multinational company in the transportation business just yesterday. And for our listeners, today is January 29th. So it's something that happened January 28th. Perhaps that has some relationship with what you just said that I probably don't need to repeat. Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, so I want to read the beginning of a pamphlet that was written by Timothy Snyder, and the pamphlet's called On Tyranny. And page one, which is like lesson one, is do not obey in advance.
Hmm.
And it says most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want and then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts in this way is teaching power what it can do. And so I say that because it's one thing, which we talked about last week, to have like funding pulled from EDI by the federal government. We're seeing, you and I are both seeing on LinkedIn the fallout. It's horrible. And then it's another thing for people like the media and multinational companies to be like, oh, well, we don't want to get on the wrong side of the US or like Trump specifically, like when it comes to the media, maybe because they're scared that he's going to retaliate. Or look what happened to Colombia this week. They, the U.S. is deporting, masses of people, documented and undocumented.
Yes.
And there were plane loads of Colombians, and the Colombian president refused to accept these U.S. military planes because he said it was degrading, to have people in handcuffs being sent on a military plane to the country. And so I'm not exactly sure what happened. So, well, no. So then what happened immediately was Trump said, fine, 25% tariff on all Colombian imports, going up to 50% in a week. Now, of course, that's a huge impact on the Colombian economy. And then the president here, Petro, he said, fine, we're going to make sure that all Americans are regularized in their immigration, and we will do the same with tariffs, And then they came to some agreement. And I'm not sure if the agreement, like, I'm not entirely sure what it was, but I think it was that the Colombians being deported could come on Colombian aircraft, government aircraft. So with more dignity was the idea.
Yes.
So I'm not really sure about like capitulation. I'm not really sure about what happened there. But the point being that people are afraid of what Trump will do if they don't do what he says. And I fear that it's not just, federal agencies or, look, it's whole countries like worrying about tariffs. And so maybe there are, multinational companies thinking if we do something that the Trump administration doesn't like, they will not let us work in that country anymore. And we will lose our entire, like that part of the business or some kind of sanction, whatever. So, this kind of preempting is just like exactly what Timothy Snyder says. It's teaching power what it can do. Like this just empowers Trump because he's like, look, I say jump and they jump, or
Mhm.
I don't even have to say jump, and
Mhm.
they think I'm going to say jump, and so they jump
Mhm.
anyway. I'm so furious. Like, where are people standing up now? Just now, before we started this, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, I was watching the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. confirmation hearing, and it was actually quite refreshing to hear these Democrats like really going at him, caring about vaccine, measles, polio, caring about mental health issues of people in the United States, AIDS, in the like the medication programs for people with AIDS in Africa, like talking about all of those issues and saying to him, do you assure me that you're going to continue with this? And for some of those things, he said yes, I will continue. And then another senator started to like quote at him like things that he has said about weaponized viruses and stuff like that. And he couldn't deny these things. And it's just like, if we talk about, gosh, how are we coming into this little coffee chat? It's like, oh my God, look at everything that's happening. I feel, and I don't even live in the United States. I live in Colombia.
Yes.
And so I, I'm here to support people in the United States. But I already feel so stressed out, and I'm not even living there, and not even like too much directly impacted. Maybe these multinational companies are gonna capitulate, and that could affect some of my income. But you know, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, there are many angles through which I could come to this topic, but I'll say something that I put on LinkedIn the other day, which I think for our listeners, it's useful to say. I quit Facebook, I quit Instagram, I quit Twitter, I quit Reddit. This was around 2020, 2021, and 2022, where I realized these platforms were making me sick in the head. I quit everything except for LinkedIn. So now LinkedIn is my only social media platform. And there's plenty of unhealthy content even there. But just for our context here, I will say that it has been an important lifeline in certain ways for me to see directly what is happening to people, especially in the context of their livelihood. And you are, of course, well aware of that. I believe that your anxiety is very much related to the fact that you have lived in the United States, that you're from the United States. So you know what this looks like. You know how the structures work or don't work in many cases. And you also have a unique perspective living now in Colombia. And I don't have any quotes in front of me, but you will see and perhaps agree that your Colombian president only a couple days ago said things in writing on social media to President Donald Trump that even the so-called leftist elected officials in the United States would never imagine saying.
Yeah.
So there's that in the mix as well. But let me see if I can step back to the quote I put on LinkedIn the other day, which is, there's this old quote, look at what people do, not what they say. And what I said in reaction to this quote is that speaking is a form of doing. So when people, whether it's Mr. Trump or his followers, say certain things, we should ask ourselves why. What is the function of speaking? And I think you just referred to that in the context of tariffs, in the context of private organizations like large multinational companies that, of course, are impacted by what happens in government. And then you went further, which is you talked about the act of saying and how that propagates to what people do about what is not said. So I'm not sure I have a nice point to tie up with a bow, but I will say what I did earlier today. And again, today is January 29th. I began sending text messages and emails to people who I knew from the federal government. And I'm a former USA federal employee. I worked at the Federal Aviation Administration for about 6 years. I know many people who are still there. And furthermore, I know many people who are in private business, which involves either consulting to the federal government or working on programs that are directly affected by what the federal government does. So, for instance, many of my contacts work in a realm where there is environmental compliance according to federal law, and that means there are federal government staff involved in their projects. So, across the vast majority of my network, there is potential impacts of what has been going on just since Sunday, not even since January 20th. And again, today is a Wednesday. So I put a newsletter out on my newsletter email list, and I said, check on the United States of America federal government employees in your network. Check on them today. Ask them, how are you feeling? How are your loved ones? And how can I support you? If you need context, here you go. Title from the BBC, Trump puts all U.S. government diversity staff on paid leave immediately. This is from last week, which you and I discussed last week. From Monday, temporary pause of agency grant, loan, and other financial assistance programs from the United States Office of Management and Budget. This is currently under litigation, but the mere sending of this memo, January 27th, which is a Monday, caused grant-related programs, which are extensive, to freeze. A number of people posted on LinkedIn that their funding portals were already locked out. So with the stroke of a pen, there was immediate damage, even though a federal court placed a stay on the memo several hours later in the same day.
Yep.
And then yesterday, fork in the road from the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, January 28th, Tuesday. Below is the email that was sent to federal employees on January 28th, presenting a deferred resignation offer. If you did not, okay, so this is an email sent apparently to the vast majority of the federal government. The quote continues, if you did not respond to that email and wish to accept the deferred resignation offer, you may do so by following these steps. And it says, send an email with the word resign in the subject line. And it goes on to continue that if you want the deferred resignation offer, you must take it by February 6th, so approximately 1 week from today. So I'm always talking about being specific rather than generic, but I do resonate with a broad quote that I've seen from at least one person on my network, which is, the chaos is the point.
Yeah.
And I think much has been made about the personalities of the individuals involved in this type of chaos, and how those personality types, the narcissism and so on, manifest themselves in these types of ways. I'm not sure I have much concrete to say about that. I will just say that the things we're seeing just now, we're talking about real people, real impacts, real documents, which, as I see these documents, I hit them to archive.is so that copies are archived and nobody can say, oh, that never happened.
Good job. Yep. Yeah, let me just say that speaking of being specific, while you were speaking, I got a text message from an international colleague, just so that we're clear the effect that this is having internationally, that AIDS medications have been stopped in clinics outside of the United States because of the USAID funding. And so what they're working on is a legal challenge immediately. And I don't know if you've ever watched Sense8, the TV series. And one of the storylines is, takes place in Kenya, and the guy's mom has AIDS. And there's a storyline around medication, and like when it's like doctored, it doesn't work because they're just trying to make money off of it, that kind of thing. And then, so what came to my mind reading this message was people need this medication like today. In fact, my antithyroid medication on Saturday, when I was running out, I phoned the pharmacy and they said, we've run out, like we can't find any. And I was like, oh, what is that going to do to my health to not have this? And then very good pharmacists eventually found some. But look at this. Look at this. People with AIDS who now aren't, they have to wait for a court to let them have their medication. I mean, this is outrageous. And this is like affecting a very close colleague that I have who just said, I need to cancel our meeting today because I have to work on this legal challenge. And you would think, this person isn't from the United States. This person doesn't work with the United States directly. And look at the knock-on effects, because the USAID has its kind of tentacles everywhere, which makes everyone in the world vulnerable to the whim of the current administration.
Right. And I think, and certainly in other podcast recordings we've done in the past, you and I have talked in different ways about the long reach of the United States geopolitically, and primary context in the past has been, for instance, with the genocide in Palestine being a perfect example. I think what is happening right this very instant, in the most literal sense, is a reminder to everybody who is listening to us that the United States of America has a long reach around the world, not just in terms of weaponry, but in terms of many, 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 many different avenues. And we could certainly, at some point in the future, talk about how that is also a form of power projection around the world. And the impacts, I really can't say. I wouldn't even hesitate to speculate at this moment, but I think I just want our listeners to leave with the awareness that this is not just about what one head of state is doing in one country.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. There's another thing I want our listeners to leave with, and that's because we need a bit of a de-stress. And I'm hoping you did your homework, Chris. Did you do your homework?
I did do my homework, but I'm not sure it's a de-stressing. So
Okay.
you gave me the challenge to write a poem and embarrass myself by reading it on the air.
Because I had embarrassed myself with a poem
Yes.
last week, just to be clear. Okay.
Yes, we both attended a poetry workshop during a online festival of resistance that happened, I believe, the first weekend after the Trump inauguration.
Just before, a couple of days before.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Just before January 20th. So here goes. The title of this poem is Apoptosis. Today I died so that others may live. That's it. That's the poem. I'm not going to indulge my strong desire to add commentary. I will just leave it for people to absorb and reflect on however they like.
Thank you. I think that kind of engaging our minds with poetry is a de-stressor, because we're going on about the news and we're intellectualizing it and we're stressed about it, and just to say, think about this, and it's like, thank you, Chris.
You're welcome. Maybe I wish we could leave on a different emotional note, but again, I will not add commentary. I will just allow you and our listeners to leave however they're leaving. Whatever
Thank
people are
you.
feeling, it's okay.
Yeah, and let's have another coffee break next week again.
That would be a great idea. I look forward to it.
Lovely. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye. You've been listening to Morning Tinto with Chris Musset Sequeira and Heather Luna. We try to record every week using events of the day or just the few days prior to be as freshly brewed as possible. For further information, check the show notes and be sure to subscribe. Talk to you soon.